Hey, what's going on, y'all? This is Daryl Perkins from the Broccoli City team, and I want to welcome you to the Impact Sessions brought to you by Capital One and Broccoli City. In today's session, we're going to be talking about financial well-being. We have Kezia Williams, known as Professor Keys, as well as Capital One Team Director Kim Allman. And really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be talking about how we can be putting our financial journeys down on paper and really planning. So we make sure that we have the educational tools, we have the resources and the strategies that we need for a successful financial future. Let's get into it.
Hi, I'm Kim Allman, Senior Director of Community Impact and Investment at Capital One. I lead our financial well-being design team, which develops national partnerships, programs, and tools that help build the financial well-being of our communities. At Capital One, we focus on developing financial education resources to empower people to save money, build credit, and manage the debt in support of their financial well-being journeys. We recently launched the Capital One Impact Initiative, which works to advance socioeconomic mobility. Our effort is built on 3 pillars: advocating for an inclusive society, building thriving communities, and creating financial tools that enrich lives. It's fueled by a $200 million 5-year commitment to catalyze economic growth in low and moderate income communities and close gaps in equity and opportunity. I'm so excited to be part of this series in partnership with Broccoli City and delighted to be sitting down with Kezia Williams to talk about financial well-being, specifically what that means for the Black community. So Kezia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. First, hello, Kim. Can I just say I'm loving your red lipstick, girl.
Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful. I'm so excited to be here. And yes, I can introduce myself. I like to tell people that I am a Black wealth evangelist. I am an emancipation activist, a second generation financial literacy coach. And I'm also the CEO of the Black Upstart and also CEO of Skill House U. I also recently launched an initiative called My Black Receipt. I hail from Richmond, Virginia, 804 for anybody who's from the area. And I'm the only child of the illustrious Gail Davis, who is my mother. And so I'm super happy to be here and I can't wait to be part of this conversation with you.
So at Capital One, we're focused on helping people on their financial journey. That includes empowering people with the tools and resources they need to be successful. But we also understand that every individual's journey to financial well-being isn't a one-size-fits-all model. We recognize that millennials are facing an economic plight, which has only been exacerbated by the events of 2020. And Black millennials in particular are struggling the most. Kezia, why do you think that is?
Why do I think that Black millennials are struggling the most during the pandemic? Yeah, it's one of those things where I was just having this conversation with one of my friends who's a millennial like me the other day. I think 2020 has thrown everybody a huge curveball. I think at the end of 2019, we all made proclamations. I was one of those people. We said things like 2020 is going to be the year that I get an 800 credit score. 2020 is going to be the year where my business reaches 6 figures. 2020 is going to be the year where I quit my 9 to 5 perhaps and go work full time for myself. 2020 is going to be the year that I become the first millionaire in my family. And we made all of these plans ahead of a new year. And then the new year hit and things changed. And I think a lot of people thought that things changing meant that their goals also had to change as well. But what I like to tell people and what I tell myself when I have self-talk is though the year may have presented new challenges, right? The plan does not change, right? The vision remains the same. Perhaps the plan needs to change rather. So if you said that you wanted to get an 800 credit score, perhaps it looks a little different in 2020, but that doesn't mean that the goal can't be achieved. Right? So you may have said that you want to quit your job, but perhaps the vision is the same, but the plan to get there has changed. And so what I like to tell millennials, again, I'm a millennial, is that we have to think through ways in which we could pivot in order to achieve those same objectives.
So thank you for that. It's a reminder that no matter what's happening, life may happen. No matter what, we need to really be ready for times when things are difficult. And 2020 has thrown a lot of difficulty at us. And so reminder that even when we have the best of intentions, we need to be ready for what happens. Can you talk a little bit about what are some tangible focus areas that Black millennials should focus on to stay on track during these unprecedented times?
Absolutely. Well, one, I think that every Black person needs to have multiple streams of income. If you do not have multiple streams of income, then you are hustling backwards. We just talked about 2020 being an uncertain year. And what that means is that no matter how stable or unstable your 9 to 5 might be, you have to figure out a way to really evaluate your skills in such a way that you can monetize those skills in the marketplace and bring in a stream of revenue that can cover those needs in your life, those bills in your life, that if God forbid that one stream of income dries up, that you can fall back on that second stream, that third stream, that fourth stream. I also think now is an amazing time to consider thinking about the stock market. One of the strategies that people very rarely talk about is making sure that your mindset is in the right place. I believe that Black wealth is a mindset before it's an asset. And so when it comes down to thinking about where you want to be in the future, you have to speak what you see until you see what you say. And we started by talking about the affirmations that people were giving themselves in 2019. You have to keep those affirmations going still, even in 2020. So if one of those is, I want to be the first millionaire in my family, well, you keep speaking in that and affirming that, even if you only have 4 figures in your bank account. And if you speak what you see until you see what you said, you begin operating in that truth, because you don't want to make yourself that liar. So I always say Black wealth mindset before it's an asset. I think those are 3 things that people should consider employing now.
So I just snaps for the mindset piece, because I think that's such a crucial part. If you don't have that mindset, if you're not ready to build that wealth and to move forward, it's going to be difficult to do that. If you're someone who maybe just really doesn't know anything about the stock market other than that you're supposed to invest, do you have any suggestions for where someone can start to get educated, to say, okay, at least I know what this is, so I can get moving with all of these great suggestions that Kezia is making?
Yeah, I want to start at the high level, and then I just want to give 3 quick tips on how you can get started before making your first investment. YouTube University is free. So I know some of us graduate from college, we have a whole mortgage, don't own a house. That is your student loan payment. And so YouTube has a plethora of resources that people can employ. Skillhouse U, that is a website that I own. We release free information on our Instagram and also on YouTube. There's also organizations like Earn Your Leisure, who puts out free information about how people can get started in these skill sets. And if not, in YouTube, you can go ahead and type in, hey, how do I invest in the stock market? And there will be a plethora of information that's available to you. I always like to tell people, don't swim in an ocean of knowledge and drown in ignorance. We're living in an information technology. So that means that your answers are on the other side of curiosity and your fingertips. Now, for new investors, one of the things that you're going to have to get smart about is you can't wake up and say you want to invest, jump into your checking account and pull out some money and throw it, and boom, you have an investment. That's not the way that it works. In order to invest, you're going to need a brokerage account. I recommend that new investors start with at least 2. I recommend at least 3. Brokerage accounts allow for you to buy assets such as equities, exchange traded funds, index funds. Depending on what brokerage account, you can also open individual retirement accounts. And each brokerage account allows you access potentially to different markets. It's going to ask you for things like your date of birth, your social security number, what your employment is, and it's also going to ask for your bank account information because they need cash to supply your first investments. Before you make your first investment, you want to make sure to do your research. One website that I like that is free 99 is Yahoo Finance. Yahoo Finance will tell you how much an exchange traded fund or company is valued right now. You can go on Yahoo Finance, type in the company name, you can type in the stock symbol if you know it, and you can look at things like what is the 52-week high, what is the 52-week low. You can look at where it's trading right now. So trading just means at what price people are buying that share for and at what price they are selling it for. And you can also look at the expense ratio. One quick tip that I didn't know when I first got started is you're looking for an expense ratio, ideally speaking, below 1%. investment. And so these are the things that you want to look at. Yahoo Finance, one other quick tip before we move on, if it's an exchange traded fund, you can go and look at holdings and you can see what are the top 10 holdings, which means what are the top 10 companies that are within their portfolio, and see what type of decisions the fund manager is making. So if you want to write down one right now, I'll give it to you, SPY, which tracks the S&P 500, S&P 500 being the top 505 publicly traded companies. When you click that holdings tab, you may see some companies that you recognize, like Amazon, like Facebook, like Google. So you use these companies all the time. So those are some tips that I would give to new investors.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So COVID-19, the pandemic, and also recent events surrounding racial injustice have really put a spotlight on the health and economic disparities faced by people of color. And it's left many of us feeling like chaos is the new normal. That anxiety, that stress, they impact all parts of our lives, and our finances are not excluded. So what strategies have you put in place to help you feel more in control of your life during these trying times?
Yeah, the civil unrest, I think, rocked the country in unforgettable and at times unbelievable ways. And I think it's a signal of the change that we have to make in America, but also in Black America specifically, I think it's a signal of our resilience. Our ability to persist past the racism that still exists today, past the discrimination that still exists today, and still in spite of a pandemic where even before the pandemic started, people were projecting that Black wealth would be zero by 2053. And yet you have Black people waking up every single day and saying, if I can make a decision today to make that statement false, I'm going to make sure my knowledge, skills, and abilities are applied in such a way where Black wealth for me is not zero, right? That Black wealth for me is my reality. So I want to start by just saying that there's resilience even in the midst of the chaos that pandemic and civil unrest have provided us. One of the strategies that we talked about was already mindset, right? Making sure that your mindset is at play. We already talked about information, the information that you should have at your fingertips, that you should wake up every single day hungry to learn. In regards to finances, before I move on to my next point, I read CNN Business every single day. So like I start my day off, I want to see what's going on in the marketplace. I want to see what's going on with business. I go to entrepreneur.com. I will look at tips and tricks about how you can market your business, your small business. I make sure that the only book I don't read is Facebook. So like I make sure that I visit this library behind me. And I also go to CNBC and Fool.com to make sure that what I'm consuming, what my eyes are seeing, what my mind is experiencing is information I can put to use practically. But then also I think we have to have a real conversation about assets and liabilities. And yes, we can talk about assets like home ownership, and we can talk about assets like the equities and investing in the stock market. We talk about liabilities, right? We can talk about the food that we might buy every single day going out to eat. When our kitchen works, we haven't visited ourselves in a couple of months. But we can also talk about assets and liabilities as it relates to relationships and the people that we build with, both professionally and also personally. So one of the strategies I've employed is being intentional about the people that I connect with, making sure that we are like-minded and making sure that we are purpose-driven. When we talk about people who are liabilities, they feel a lot like a bill. So a person who feels a lot like a bill is a person who will give you exactly what you paid for. You call them, you list your dreams, and they listen. You go out, spend time with them. They give you their time, but they might not give you advice. They might not give you insights. It's not saying that the time is invaluable, but they're giving you just enough. When you talk about assets, you're talking about people who return on their investments. You're talking about people who are multipliers. So when you come together and you share ideas, you're intentional about giving each other feet forward. You're intentional about sharing your resources, sharing your contacts. One of the quotes that I always go to is that people say rising tides lift all boats. But when they talk about rising tides lift all boats, they'll focus on the boats. Is my boat bigger than the next person's boat? Instead of being the tide, right? The tide is the water, right? The water body that lifts the boats inside of the ocean. So you should focus on being that tide. And the tide is not just one drop of water. It's a collective of people coming together to make positive change. And so one of the strategies that I've employed during this pandemic is making sure that I have the right people around me, because if you have 9 broke friends, the probability is you'll be the 10th broke one. But if you have 9 wealth-minded friends, the probability is you'll be the 10th wealth-minded friend.
So I love that, because what I hear you saying is community is so important. The people that are around you, it's so important, and it plays a role in your financial health, but I think also your physical and your mental well-being. How can people find and create these communities of support?
Yeah, I think that that's really important. I think your interests inform your relationships. So the most valuable relationships I've had, I've gotten busy in whatever industry I'm interested in. Right now, that's entrepreneurship, that's innovation, and that's also financial literacy. And so when you become interested in that industry, you seek out resources that can help you grow in that area, right? That's asset behavior. So that might be a group chat that I asked to join. That might be a Facebook group that I asked to join that may say Wealth 2020, Wealth 2025. Those are the social media pages that I choose to follow, like HBCU Wall Street, like Official Black Wall Street. And in joining those spaces and places and being an active participant, I begin to see other like-minded individuals like myself and reach out to them and cultivate that relationship. One helpful feed forward I can give people right now is that when you reach out to someone, start with what you can give them, not what they can give you. So my most fruitful relationships have been, hey, I really like what you're doing. I respect the work that you're doing in the field. How can I share that on my social media so more people can find out about you? I see that you had a question about the difference between an LLC and an S corp. If you should switch it over, switch your business over from an LLC from an S corp. I did that 2 years ago. Here's some advice that I can give you, right? When you start with giving, people are more open to build with you, because then the relationship doesn't feel transactional. So I think that that's the first step that you should take in trying to find those tribe of people that are reflective of where you want to go.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. And I'm actually going to pick up on the piece on small business, as you mentioned how important that is to you, and that's an area of interest. So according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, the impact of COVID-19 resulted in record losses for small businesses across the industries, across the country between February and April of this year. Data shows that the highest impacted demographic are African-American owned small businesses at 41%. But you were able to start My Black Receipt during the pandemic, which encouraged people to buy Black. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work and what that venture taught you?
Absolutely. My Black Receipt was in response to the civil unrest that we discussed earlier. And it was in response specifically to the public execution of George Floyd. During that time, people were asking the question, what can I do to really demonstrate that I support Black life? And what can I do to demonstrate that my value is that Black lives matter? And the conversation started trending towards how can I support Black businesses? Just like you said, over 40% of Black-owned businesses are projected to close by the time this pandemic concludes. And so I remember I woke up one day and I was asking myself the question, I was like, well, I could buy from a Black-owned business and that's important and that's significant, but how can I kind of do that, but do it on a larger scale? And I ended up calling one of my friends who's in tech, and I asked him if he could build a tool, and that tool be a tool that could capture the receipts from purchases made in Black-owned businesses, but instead of it being private, that information be publicly counted in a ticker similar to Color of Change that collects signatures on petitions, so that people could see the collective impact when people put their collective dollars together towards one social cause. And this social cause specifically being the cause of Black-owned businesses. So he said, well, how many months do I have? Do I have 8-9 months? And I said, no, brother, you got a week. So he put it together in a week. And we were up until 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, just really pushing forward towards the launch. And we launched on June 19th. And our call to action was really for people who supported Black-owned businesses to put their receipt where their protest was. It's one thing to show up on social media and say, buy from a Black-owned business, but it's another thing to reach down in your purse, pass the hot sauce, and take your dollar into a Black-owned business and make that purchase. And so we set the goal of $5 million. We launched on June 19th, and we said that the movement was going to be 17 consecutive days. And we would go from June 19th to a blackout day. It was just pedal to the metal from that point. The reason why we decided to make this more than just a day was in memory of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, where people boycotted for over 380 days in order to have the type of access they wanted in the bus system. For us, it wasn't just about going to a Black-owned business because you thought it was charity. It was about making buying Black your practice, right? Not just protesting for a day, but saying, how can I wake up today and say, if I need something, I believe that a Black-owned business could supply that need. And in 17 days, we had participants spend over $7 million in Black-owned businesses and upload over 19,000 receipts. So, yeah.
That's amazing and inspiring. And my red lipstick, Black-owned business. I certainly try to put my dollars where my mouth is and support in as many ways as possible. But how do we keep this going? How can we better motivate more support of Black-owned businesses? How do we make this sustainable so it's not just a reaction to George Floyd? It's not just a reaction to, there's all of a sudden this interest, but that we are really, and not just Black people, but people everywhere getting more folks to buy from Black-owned businesses.
Yeah, I'm going to start with Black people first. And the reason why I'm going to start there is because we spend $1.3 trillion annually. And a lot of people usually say we have $1.3 trillion worth of spending power. But it's not powerful if we're making every other community rich but our own. And so for Black people, if we're spending $1.3 trillion, that means we have capital to deploy. So why not be intentional about the 2.56 million Black entrepreneurs who are out there every single day making their business work? The other thing is, I think there has to be a mindset shift on believing that every Black entrepreneur is your kinfolk. They might be your skinfolk, might not be your kinfolk. That means you shouldn't be asking for the friends and family discount. So there's a belief, right, that Black-owned businesses owe us something. Right. And I think that to a certain extent, when it comes down to Black entrepreneurship, that there's a responsibility that they feel to the community, but they also create value. And if they're creating value, then they should be paid what their products and services are worth. I think the other thing is sometimes we give up on Black-owned businesses a little too quickly. And Black entrepreneurs should be afforded the same grace that corporations are afforded when they offend us and we protest for 2 minutes. And so what that means is that if they're a little bit late getting back to you, you expected a response in a day, they got back to you in 2 days. If you expected a package in 7 days, you got it on the 8th day. It is our responsibility to give that feedback, that feed forward to the Black-owned business so that they are able to take your constructive criticism and build upon their business so there is a more solid foundation. And also, I think it's important for people to understand that most Black-owned businesses are pulling up on a policy the same way that a lot of large corporations pulled up on policies like PPP and also the economic injury disaster loan. They're pulling up, well, people will say they're pulling up by their bootstraps, but that's not possible, humanly possible. But what they're doing is a lot of them are working 9 to 5 and they're having to use their own income, their own earnings in order to sustain their business. And so when we talk about grace, what we're really doing is realizing the reality of Black entrepreneurship is not the same as perhaps white male entrepreneurship, simply because of systemic issues. The last thing that I'll say is as we think about buying Black, whether you're Black or you're not, is that when you buy from a Black-owned business and they're able to use your capital to scale, Black entrepreneurs are more likely to create Black jobs. Black entrepreneurs are more likely to give back to Black causes, and Black entrepreneurs are more likely to open their business in Black communities, and the assets that they gain, pass it on to Black families within that space. And so that's truly recycling your dollar and being Black with your dollar in common with your cents.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Really great suggestions and really amazing points about the importance of stop asking for the freebie. Pay those people for the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about financial education. This is something that's near and dear to my heart and very centered around the work that I do at Capital One. Financial education and financial wellness are tightly intertwined, but there are a lot of misconceptions about finances. So we need to make sure that we're educated, but education is also not enough. We can't just have an information dump where we just throw information at people, but we really want to be able to provide them with guidance on what to do and how to take that information. When we design programming for our customers, we look very closely at helping them try to figure out how to take action. What role do you believe financial education plays in the Black community? And as a financial leader, how do you address that?
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent question. And I think it's one that is extremely complex and hard to answer in just the short amount of time that we have here, but I will definitely try. I think that financial education is going to have to be something that people take an active interest in and pursue despite what the educational system provides. It is no big surprise that there are many children, regardless of race, who are graduating from high school without being financially literate, and who are going to college and graduating and not being financially literate, which means that their first access, right, to wanting to learn financial literacy is usually when they've gotten into a mountain of debt, or when they're trying to figure out how to buy their first asset and they're trying to figure out who they can trust to advise them and make it such a big purchase. And so for Black people, especially, this education, if it's not coming from the school system, may not be coming from the home, because our parents, our grandparents perhaps didn't have that education provided for them in the school system. So I think that people should ask themselves, what are those questions, those burning questions that I have about my money, right? Like, how can I get my credit together? You know that there's such a thing as a good credit score. Ask yourself, what's the difference between a good credit score and an excellent credit score? And what are the different strategies that you can employ in order to get there? You mentioned that Capital One has resources. How can you get access to those free resources that can walk you through those steps from people who have been there before, either through personal experience or because they've studied it? Asking yourself the question, like, if I'm going to start a business, instead of taking an uncalculated risk with my money, how are there programs like Black Upstart, which is a program that I run, that walks you through 6 strategic steps you should take before you actually make your first sale? And it doesn't start with your business idea. It starts with trying to figure out where the market needs are. The same way that people will commit themselves to getting a certification, I think that people should commit themselves to getting financially literate so that they can break whatever financial chains of bondage that they had in previous generations and establish a new paradigm for the generations coming behind them.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and and I thank you so much for that. So you have shared so much great information. I want to make sure that we leave today empowering viewers to take control of their finances. You spoke earlier about some tools and resources available if you want to invest. Curious if there are other tools that you may want to mention or share with folks to help them manage other aspects of their financial lives, or certainly want to share any strategies that we think could be helpful in helping people create and or keep up their financial well-being. So any tools that come to mind that you want to share?
One particular strategy that I employ that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, I'll talk about two. One is sacrifice. I think that sacrifice is important. When I first moved to Washington, D.C., though I had just moved out of my dorm where I had 3 roommates, which is a lot of roommates to have as a senior in college. And it was tempting to want to get my own place, because if I wanted to leave my shirt in the middle of the floor, well, nobody gonna wake me up at 6 o'clock in the morning and tell me pick it up. But I had to be realistic about where I was then. I was making $19,000 a year. And if I did get my own apartment, that would take up nearly 2 paychecks just to pay my rent. And that was before paying other expenses that I had in my life, like a car note at the time, and also like a student loan payments. And so there were certain sacrifices that I needed to make. I slept on a couch. I didn't even have a room when I moved to Washington, D.C. I did not go out shopping every single weekend. I shopped at Salvation Army and Goodwill. The cashiers all knew my name, and those clothes looked just as good as my colleagues. And I was very frugal when it came to going out to eat. So I spent 2 years not going to brunch, not going to dinner, and spending money. I think we need to start elevating what for some people feel like are unpopular financial decisions at a young age that position you for success in the future. Another smart decision that I made when I was young, when I was just 20 years old, I started investing in my retirement account. Specifically, I started investing in my 401k. I was only 20 years old, and my mom was like, you need to think about retirement. I'm thinking, I'm not going to retire till I'm 103. And she was like, I hope not. Don't hope you retire before you're 103. But she was like, now is the time for you to ask your employer, your HR department specifically, if they match your retirement contributions. And because you're only 20 years old, you benefit from a couple things. If they match, you benefit from that matching. And 2, you benefit from compound interest. And so make sure that you get active at 20 years old, because that money will grow at a substantial rate, at a faster rate than if you start at 45 and 50 years old. And still, that's not too late to start. You always want to start if you have not started. But that was a tip that my mom taught me. And she also taught me how to evaluate my mutual funds. So making sure that I knew what assets were in that mutual fund, how to take the number 110, subtract it by my age, and that have that number represent the amount of equities or stock should be inside of my mutual funds. One of the earliest mistakes that I made was having 60% in money markets. Money markets is the same as having a savings account, and your money doesn't grow as quickly as if it was invested in the stock market. So I would encourage every Black person to consider investing in your 401k, your 403b, your thrift savings plan. If you do not have an employer-sponsored account, consider your Roth individual retirement account, your traditional IRA accounts. You want to make sure you're consistent with that, because the average Black family only has $19,000 set aside in their retirement accounts. And that's not enough to retire without the Black tax sustaining your life. And then finally, what I don't hear a lot of people talking about is the financial benefits of starting a business, even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur. And I hear that all the time, but what I like to tell people is that the tax code was set up for owners to win and employees to pay. And so when you own a business, there are things that you can write off, specifically expenses that it takes to run your business that you can't write off as an individual. So that includes the laptop that you use to make sales, a portion of your cell phone bill if you're calling people in order to make sales, the internet that it takes for you in order to power your computer and get access to the internet, your mileage if you're driving to and from to see clients, even a portion of your meals if you're sitting down and you have discussions about business. It's an opportunity for you to reduce the amount of taxable income that you've earned so you pay less taxes and perhaps qualify yourself for a tax refund. So even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, I would highly encourage, as you think about starting a home-based business and operating that at least 3 hours a week, so it's not classified as a hobby by the IRS, so you can use the expenses that it takes to run that business to reduce your tax liability. That's the way that the wealthy people think. So those are 3 tips that I can think of just right now that I hope are super useful to people.
I think those are wonderful. And really what I hear you saying is really the importance of being knowledgeable, of making a plan, of being deliberate about what you do when you manage your finances and you think about your financial well-being. it sounds like your mom was able to pass a wealth of information to you. I have to say, I also luckily have parents. My dad, I call him my financial guru. I'm lucky and grateful for that. And I see that you had a similar situation, but that importance that even if you don't have that person in your life who's telling you that, they're here listening to you now and hearing that, and that importance of starting early, I think is so key, because I think people often feel like, oh, I can wait till later, and they lose a lot of that that ability to gain those finances. But I think you need to make a plan, and you need to take action. So I love that that's part of your message, is really getting out there, learning, and doing what you need to do to make sure that you get that financial well-being where you need it to be. So thank you so much, Kezia. Really enjoyed this conversation. And I know folks are walking away with some great info.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. I had a wonderful time talking to you. You were so easy to talk to. And I just want to throw in with your red lipstick that this shirt is from a Black-owned business, Grass Fields. So one of my favorite vendors. So thank you so much for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Thanks.